With just over 2 weeks left in the general election, the last major UK manifesto has finally been published. So the Tories have joined the pack with their 64-page manifesto, and having read every page, we're now going to summarise what they had to say. If you want to look through any of the other manifestos, check out the link to the full playlist down below. This video was brought to you by Mogul News. Get your free trial of their amazing news aggregation service using our special URL. There's a link in the description. The Conservatives' manifesto is broken down into 5 broad sections. Get Brexit done, we will focus on your priorities, we will unleash Britain's potential, we will strengthen Britain in the world, and we will put you first. So let's start at the beginning and work our way through. In the Get Brexit Done section, the Conservatives promise that they will start putting the deal through Parliament before Christmas, and that we will leave the European Union by January. They also promise to keep the UK out of the single market and any form of customs union, as well as ending the role of the European Court of Justice. They also promise an Australian-style points-based immigration system, and say that they won't extend the current implementation period beyond December 2020. Under the section of Unleashing Britain's Potential, they say that they won't borrow to fund day-to-day spending, but will invest thoughtfully and responsibly in infrastructure, as well as saying that the level of debt will be lower by the end of Parliament. In the section on your priorities, the Conservatives cover a lot of ground, beginning with NHS and social care. They say that between 2018 and 2023, they will have raised funding in the NHS by 29%, which means that by the end of Parliament, that will be more than £650 million extra per week. The Conservatives promise to build and fund 40 new hospitals over the next 10 years, as well as promising 50,000 more nurses, with students receiving a £5,000 to £8,000 annual maintenance grant for every year they're doing their course. They also promise there'll be 6,000 more doctors in general practice. They say they want to deliver 50 million extra GP appointments a year, an increase of over 15%. They say they'll treat mental health with the same urgency as physical health and extend life expectancy by 5 years by 2035. The Conservatives also say they'll clamp down on health tourism and increase the NHS surcharge paid by those overseas. Finally, they promise that when they're negotiating trade deals, the NHS will not be on the table. For social care, the Conservatives promise to spend £1 billion extra every year on social care staff, as well as better infrastructure, technology and facilities. And they also want to spend £64 million over 3 years for additional capacity in community care settings for those with learning disabilities and autism. For schools, the Conservatives want to raise teachers' starting salaries to £30,000, as well as backing heads and teachers on discipline. They want to deliver more school places for children with complex social educational needs, and offer an arts premium to secondary schools to fund enriching activities for all pupils. Under their section on supporting working families, the Conservatives say that in their first months, they've announced an increase to the national living wage, currently forecast at £10.50 an hour, as well as widened its reach to everyone over 21. They also promise not to raise the rates of income tax, national insurance or VAT, saying that they not only want to freeze taxes, but cut them too. They'll do this by raising the national insurance threshold to £9,500 next year, with an ultimate ambition to ensure that the first £12,500 you earn is completely tax-free. The Conservatives also say they want to keep the triple lock on the winter fuel payment, the older person's bus pass, and other pensioner benefits. In their manifesto, the Conservatives say that they recognise the value of free TV licences for over 65s and believe that they should be funded by the BBC. They also want to continue the rollout of universal credit, as well as putting an end to the benefits freeze, while making sure that it pays to work more hours. The Conservatives pledge to maintain their commitment on free school meals, as well as investing £500 million in youth services for young people. In crime, the Conservatives want to make it easier for officers to stop and search those convicted of knife crime, as well as introducing tougher sentences for the worst offenders, and ending automatic halfway release from prison for serious crimes. The Conservatives also say that they'll back the National Citizen Service, and promote it in schools as a way of bringing communities together. And finally, they say that people coming into the country from the EU will only have access to unemployment, housing and child benefit after 5 years. The Conservatives begin their pledges for unleashing Britain's potential with a new deal for towns. They say they'll cut taxes for small retail businesses and local music venues, pubs and cinemas. They'll introduce a new Safer Streets Fund, which will invest in preventative measures like new CCTV or community wardens. They'll establish a £150 million community ownership fund to encourage local takeovers of civic organisations or community assets that are under threat, including local football clubs, but also pubs and post offices. They'll invest £100 billion in additional infrastructure spending, as well as granting flood defences an extra £4 billion in new funding. The Conservatives pledged to deliver Northern Powerhouse Rail between Leeds and Manchester, as well as investing £1 billion in completing the fast charging network to ensure that everyone's within 30 miles of a rapid electric vehicle charging station. On top of this, they plan to phase out the sale of new conventional petrol and diesel cars. For housing, the Conservatives say they'll offer more homes to local families and maintain their commitment to a right to buy for all council tenants. They'll bring in a better deal for renters, including abolishing no-fault evictions and only requiring one lifetime deposit which moves with the tenant. The Conservatives also want to end the blight of rough sleeping by the end of next Parliament by expanding successful pilots and programmes. They'll continue to progress their target of 300,000 homes a year by the mid-2020s, and will amend planning rules so that infrastructure like roads, schools and GP surgeries come into effect before people move into new homes. The Conservatives also pledge to protect and enhance the Green Belt. For businesses, they plan to cut the burden of tax by reducing business rates, and also say that they'll support startups and small businesses via government procurement and commit to paying them on time. They'll also set out a new anti-tax avoidance and evasion law, as well as doubling the maximum prison term to 14 years for individuals convicted of the most egregious examples of tax fraud. They also say that major multinational companies should pay their fair share of tax, and as a part of that approach, they'll implement the digital services tax. For students, they say they'll look at the interest rates on loan repayments, with a view to reducing the burden of debt on students, and also say that they'll continue to explore ways of tackling the problem of grade inflation and low-quality courses. They also say that they'll strengthen academic freedom and free speech in universities, and continue to focus on raising standards. For workers, the Conservatives say they'll ensure that they have a right to request a more predictable contract, as well as encouraging flexible working. They also commit to the largest ever increase in domestic public R&D spending. The Conservatives also say that once they get Brexit done, they'll free up farmers from the bureaucratic Common Agricultural Policy and move to a system based on public money for public goods. Also, upon leaving the EU, they'll leave the Common Fisheries Policy, becoming an independent coastal state and taking back control of our waters. For recycling, Conservatives say they'll introduce a new levy to increase the proportion of recyclable plastics in packaging, as well as banning the export of plastic waste to non-OECD countries. They'll also continue to work with all sides to re-establish the Northern Ireland Executive and Assembly, and will work to ensure that Northern Ireland's business and producers enjoy unfettered access to the rest of the UK, and that in the implementation of their Brexit deal, they'll maintain and strengthen the integrity and smooth operation of our internal market. The Conservatives also comment that they're opposed to a second independence referendum for Scotland. They also say they get rid of the Fixed Term Parliaments Act and ensure that we have updated and equal parliamentary boundaries. Finally, they say they'll protect the integrity of our democracy by introducing identification to vote at polling stations, as well as stopping postal vote harvesting and measures to prevent any foreign interference in our elections. For their pledges to strengthen Britain's place in the world, they say they'll introduce legislation to tackle the vexatious legal claims that undermine our armed forces and further incorporate the Armed Forces Covenant into law. They also say they'll offer a guaranteed job interview for veterans for any public sector role. They also say that they'll continue to exceed the NATO target of spending 2% of GDP on defence and increase the budget by at least 0.5% above inflation every year. The Conservatives also want to maintain our Trident nuclear deterrent. The Conservatives say that they'll support marginalised groups in the developing world, hosting the UK government's first ever international LGBT conference. They also say that they'll proudly maintain our commitment to spend 0.7% of GNI on development. The Conservatives promise that they'll lead the global fight against climate change by delivering on our world-leading target of net zero greenhouse gas emissions by 2050. They also say that they won't support fracking unless the science shows categorically that it can be done safely. They say that they'll lower bills by investing $9.2 billion in the energy efficiency of homes, schools and hospitals. They also say they'll aim to have 90% of UK trade covered by free trade agreements within the next 3 years, starting with the USA, Australia, New Zealand and Japan. These will be negotiated in parallel with our EU deal. So, those are the core points of the Conserves' manifesto. What do you think of their policies? Make sure to let us know in the comments below. This video was brought to you by Mogul News. Mogul News handpicks stories from some of the world's leading newspapers, including The Economist, The FT, The Times, Bloomberg and more, allowing you to get up to speed fast with daily briefings or dive into topics you're already interested in with handpicked premium ad-free content from prestigious journalists all across the political divide. You could think of it as the Netflix of news. To find out more and get an exclusive discount on Mogul News, click the link below. Be sure to subscribe if you want more manifesto and election updates as they come out.